My name is Natalie Grace Whitaker, and on January 14th, 2025, something happened to me that changed the course of my entire life, and honestly, the way I see eternity. At the time, I was a literature professor at a small community college in northern Georgia. I lived a pretty normal life, married to my husband, Marcus, for 11 years. We had 2 boys, ages 6 and 9. I kept busy with lesson plans, soccer practices, and Sunday mornings at church, though I'll be honest, most of the time, I was just going through the motions. Faith was more of a background tune than a melody I truly lived by. I used to think I had all the spiritual answers. I had studied religions, philosophies, sacred texts. I knew the academic side of it all. But deep down, I was numb. I would go to church, smile, sing the songs, but I couldn't tell you the last time I actually felt anything. I wondered often whether all these different beliefs were just different expressions of the same God. I was respectful of every path, but didn't really commit to any with my whole heart. That all changed on a Tuesday morning when I went into the hospital for what I assumed would be a standard outpatient surgery. Just a minor procedure, nothing serious. I even joked with the nurse that I'd be home in time to make dinner. But as they wheeled me into the operating room and the anesthesiologist told me to count backwards from 10, something happened. I remember getting to 7, and then everything went black except I was still aware. In fact, I became more aware than I've ever been in my life. It felt like I was being pulled upward with a force so strong and sudden it almost scared me, but it didn't hurt. Within seconds, I was floating above my body. I could see the doctors rushing, a nurse shouting for epinephrine, someone doing chest compressions. One of them yelled, "She's crashing." I saw the flatline on the monitor and knew right then. My heart had stopped. But instead of fear, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. A kind of peace that makes you feel like nothing else matters, not pain, not time, not even your own life. It was like the air itself was whispering, "You're safe now." The hospital room began to fade, like mist dissolving in the morning sun. Then I was moving through what I can only describe as a tunnel of light. Not a harsh or blinding light, but something alive and warm. I wasn't walking or flying, just moving, as if the light was pulling me closer to something. I didn't want to resist. In fact, I never wanted to stop moving forward. As I came out of the tunnel, I arrived in a place that words cannot do justice. It wasn't like any place on earth, but it didn't feel unfamiliar either. It was as if I had come home after being gone my whole life and finally realized where I truly belonged. The colors were alive. The ground, the sky, everything seemed to glow with the kind of love that doesn't just surround you, it fills you. And then I saw him. Jesus. Not like the portraits we hang in church, not like a man from a storybook. He radiated power, but it was gentle. His light didn't blind, it embraced. When he looked at me, it was like he saw every inch of who I was. All my brokenness, all my doubts, all the years I spent pretending. And he loved me anyway. When he said my name, Natalie, I broke. Not in pain, but in a flood of realization. I had never really been known until that moment. I dropped to my knees and wept. I wept because I felt whole for the first time in my life. The sound of his voice wasn't just sound. It healed something inside of me I didn't even know was hurting. I couldn't speak. I didn't have to. He knew everything already. His eyes didn't just see me, they understood me. And even though I hadn't earned a single ounce of it, his love wrapped around me like a warm blanket on a freezing night. He stood before me in complete silence for a moment, and yet that silence spoke more than 1,000 sermons ever could. It was as if time had stopped, and all that existed was me, him, and the weightless love flowing between us. I couldn't think about Earth or my family or even the fact that I had just died. Everything in me was absorbed in him, his presence, his peace, his power. I wanted to stay there forever. I didn't want to return. I didn't care what I had left behind. All that mattered in that moment was that I was with Jesus and I was finally whole. But he had other plans. After a while, he took a step closer, reached out his hand, and lifted me to my feet. I wasn't even aware I had the strength to stand, but in his presence, I wasn't weak. He looked into my eyes and said, "You've had questions. About me. About why I feel far away. About whether your prayers matter." I couldn't speak, but I nodded. It was true. I had so many questions for so many years. Questions I was too afraid to say out loud, even in church. Questions that had hollowed out my faith until it was just a shell I wore on Sundays. He smiled, and when he smiled, it felt like the sunrise broke over my soul. "Come," he said, "I want to show you something." And with that, everything around us changed. I wasn't standing in that glowing place anymore. I was suddenly above the earth, high above, like I was seeing the world through heaven's eyes. But I wasn't just looking at land and water. I saw light and darkness moving across the surface of the globe. Swirls of color, patches of shadow, and streams of glowing light flowing like rivers across continents. It wasn't physical. It was spiritual. And somehow I understood it all without needing words. Jesus pointed toward a specific part of the world. It was the Middle East countries I had only heard about on the news. Places like Syria, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Egypt. And as I looked closer, I saw tiny sparks of light appearing all over those regions. At first, there were just a few, then more. Dozens, hundreds, thousands. Each one pulsed gently like a heartbeat. I asked him what they were, and he said, "These are my children. These are the ones who are seeing me." I didn't understand at first. Seeing him? He nodded slowly. "They are Muslims. They are meeting me in dreams and visions. In 2025, their numbers are multiplying faster than ever before." As he spoke, I saw scenes unfolding beneath me, real people in real places. I saw a young man asleep on a thin mat inside a dimly lit room in Tehran. As he slept, a light filled the room, and I saw Jesus appear to him. The man woke up in a panic, breathing heavily, his eyes full of confusion and wonder. Then I saw an elderly woman in Cairo, kneeling in prayer, whispering words into the air with tears streaming down her face. And there he was again, standing beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. She gasped and fell back, stunned but peaceful. These weren't symbolic visions. These were happening. These were real souls being touched by the living Christ. I turned to Jesus, overwhelmed, and asked him, "Why are you doing this now?" His expression changed. There was joy in his eyes, but also something heavy, something urgent. "Because the time is short," he said. "The veil is thin, Natalie. Hearts are softening in places where the gospel was once shut out. I am answering prayers that have been rising for decades. But my church isn't ready." I could feel the sadness in his voice when he said that. Not anger, just sorrow. The kind of sorrow that comes from seeing your children miss something beautiful because they were too distracted looking elsewhere. He then waved his hand gently, and the vision shifted again. Now I was seeing small churches, prayer rooms, basements. Places that wouldn't make headlines, but they were glowing in the spiritual realm. I saw a group of elderly women in a tiny chapel in Nebraska, holding hands in a circle, praying faithfully for the Muslim world. They didn't look like anyone special. They weren't famous or loud. But the light that came from their prayers was golden, stretching out across oceans and into villages and cities I couldn't name. Jesus looked at me and said, "These are the ones who never gave up. Their prayers are what opened the door." Then I saw the contrast. Churches full of distractions. Christians arguing over politics, doctrine, and temporary things while this incredible movement of God was happening right under their noses. I saw believers scrolling on their phones while their brothers and sisters across the world were meeting Jesus in dreams. I saw people walking away from prayer altogether, convinced it didn't work, while heaven was moving in response to seeds planted years ago. "They're looking for me in old ways," Jesus said, "but I am doing a new thing." He turned to me again, and his voice was soft but firm. "You have to tell them. You have to let them know what you've seen." I wanted to say something, to tell him I would do it, but the words wouldn't come out. Instead, all I could do was cry. The weight of what I was seeing, the beauty, the urgency, the sorrow, it crushed me in the best and worst ways. My heart was breaking, but it was also waking up. I realized that I had been sleepwalking through my faith. I had spent years asking where God was, when the truth was, he'd been moving all along. I just hadn't been looking in the right places. Jesus knew that. And somehow, he still chose me to see this. He reached out and touched my forehead, and in that instant, the vision went deeper. I wasn't just watching anymore. I was feeling what they felt. I could feel the fear of a Muslim man who had just encountered Jesus in his dream, terrified to tell his family but unable to forget what he saw. I felt the joy of a young girl in a refugee camp who had met him in the middle of the night and now whispered his name to herself with a trembling smile. I felt the ache of believers in the West who had prayed for years without seeing results, slowly losing hope, never realizing that their prayers were the very foundation of this awakening. It was all connected, every soul, every prayer, every tear. Then Jesus showed me something that shattered my heart. I saw Muslim converts coming to Christian churches, desperate for community, desperate to understand what had happened to them. And instead of welcome, I saw suspicion. I saw churches hesitate, judge, question their motives. I saw Christians turn them away, not out of hate, but out of fear and ignorance. And I saw those new believers walk back into the shadows, alone, hiding their faith because there was no one to walk with them. Jesus looked down and whispered, "The enemy wants to keep them separated. He wants my children divided. But I am tearing down the wall." Suddenly, I saw what could happen if the church opened its eyes. It was like a flood of light poured over the earth. I saw Christians embracing former Muslims, listening to their stories, sharing meals, learning from each other. I saw churches overflowing with prayer, worshiping together in different languages, but the same spirit. I saw discipleship happening over kitchen tables and in quiet parks. I saw Muslim background believers teaching Christians how to pray with fire, with devotion, with everything they had. And I saw the church, the real church, finally starting to look like the body of Christ again. I turned back to Jesus, tears streaming down my face. I felt like my heart couldn't take any more. There was so much hope in what he showed me, but also so much responsibility. I wanted to stay with him forever. I wanted to cling to that peace, that love, that perfect belonging. But he looked at me with those eyes that held entire galaxies, and I knew what was coming before he even spoke. "It's not your time," he said softly. I shook my head and begged him not to send me back. I told him I didn't want to return to the pain, the confusion, the chaos of the world. I told him I didn't feel strong enough to carry a message like this. But he gently took my hands in his and said, "Natalie, your sons still need their mother. And my church needs your voice. They need to hear this. They need to remember that I am still moving, just not always in the ways they expect." He leaned in and touched my forehead once more, and I felt something being sealed into my memory. "Tell them everything," he said. "Tell them their prayers are working. Tell them I'm moving among the people they've given up on. Tell them not to be afraid to open their hearts. A great harvest is coming, and they must be ready." His words felt like they were being carved into my soul. I nodded, sobbing, clutching his hands like a child not wanting to let go of a parent. And then, just like that, I felt it. The warmth faded. The colors dimmed. That love, that peace, that beautiful stillness began to slip away. It felt like I was being yanked backward through cold water. The pain returned instantly. Sharp, raw, real. I opened my eyes to the harsh brightness of the operating room lights. A voice shouted, "She's back." I heard the rush of people moving around me, the beeping of machines, and the crushing pain in my chest where they had been doing compressions. I had been gone for 9 minutes. Dead. And yet, here I was. The days that followed were a blur. The doctors couldn't explain how I came back without any brain damage or complications. One of them told me, flat out, that I should have never woken up the way I did. Another nurse told my husband, Marcus, that in her 20 years in surgery, she had never seen anyone come back that fast, that alert, that clear. But I wasn't thinking about the miracle of my recovery. I was thinking about him. About what he had shown me. About what he had told me to do. I couldn't stop replaying his words in my mind. Tell them everything. At first, no one really believed me. The doctors chalked it up to anesthesia-induced hallucination. Marcus just smiled and held my hand, telling me I needed rest. Even some friends from church gave me that polite, cautious look, the one that says, "Maybe you imagined it. Maybe it was just a dream." But I knew what I saw. I knew it wasn't a dream. It was more real than anything I'd ever experienced. More real than this hospital bed. More real than the white walls around me. More real than the world I'd returned to. I hadn't imagined it. I had stood before Jesus, and he had given me something I could never forget, no matter how much the world tried to make me doubt it. As I recovered and slowly returned to normal life, I couldn't go back to the way things were before. I couldn't just slip into the old routines of comfort and silence. I started a small prayer group, just a few women from my neighborhood, nothing fancy. I told them what I had seen, what Jesus had shown me. Some of them cried, some were speechless. And within a few weeks, we were on our knees every night, praying not just for our own families, but for people we'd never met. For men and women in Iran, in Afghanistan, in Syria, in Egypt. For people who might be seeing Jesus right now as we were praying. Then I started reaching out. I connected with a few missionaries I knew from college, people working in parts of the world I used to only read about in textbooks. And one by one, the stories started coming in. They weren't rumors. They weren't second-hand tales. These were first-hand reports, thousands of Muslims coming forward, saying they had seen Jesus. In dreams, in visions, in moments of desperation. And their descriptions, they matched what I had seen. His presence, his light, his voice. They knew it was him, even though they had never been taught his name and love before. That's when I knew this wasn't just happening in my spirit. It was real. It was happening everywhere. The more I heard, the more I realized just how widespread this was. These weren't isolated incidents. This wasn't rare. Jesus was appearing to Muslims across the world by the tens of thousands every day, every night. And not just in one place or one type of situation. He was showing up in refugee camps, war zones, quiet villages, and big cities. He was stepping into people's dreams and standing at the edge of their beds. He was walking beside them in visions as they prayed. He was comforting, guiding, calling them by name, just like he had done for me. One missionary in Turkey told me about a man who had seen Jesus 3 nights in a row. No Bible, no church background, nothing. But he knew who it was. He said the man in white light came to him and told him, "I am the way." That man is now leading secret Bible studies, even though it could cost him his life. Another story came from a woman in Lebanon who met Jesus in a dream while fleeing violence. She had never even heard the gospel, but in her dream, he called her daughter and told her, "You are safe now." She woke up crying and ran to find a missionary the next day, begging to know more about the man she had seen. These weren't coincidences. These were divine appointments. They were moments of heaven breaking through the veil, just like Jesus told me. And I couldn't stay silent anymore. Every time I heard one of these testimonies, I felt that same fire rise up in my chest. I remembered his voice, his eyes, his words. "Tell them." And I knew this wasn't just about me having a dramatic near-death experience. It was about what comes next. About what we, as the church, are going to do with what's already happening. So I started speaking. I shared my story with anyone who would listen. Churches, women's groups, Bible studies. At first, it was hard. Some people were skeptical. Some smiled politely and moved on. But others listened. Others felt what I felt. They knew something in their spirit was true about all of it. And soon, prayer groups began forming across cities. People who had never once prayed for the Muslim world were now weeping over souls they had never met. And you know what started happening next? Some of them started having dreams too. People here, in America, ordinary Christians, waking up with a name or a place on their heart. Waking up feeling like Jesus was asking them to pray for someone across the world. And that's when it hit me the hardest. This isn't just a story about Muslims meeting Jesus in dreams. It's a story about how we respond. It's about what we do with the knowledge that he is moving right now, in real time, in places we thought were too far, too hard, or too closed. For so long, we've believed revival had to look a certain way. We thought it would happen in packed stadiums, with worship bands and microphones. But Jesus is showing up in silence, in secret, in dreams that no one hears about on the news. And he's asking us to be ready, to pray, to open our hearts, to be the church that welcomes, not the one that questions or pushes away. I've met former Muslims who now love Jesus with a fire that could melt stone. I've seen the way they pray, the way they speak his name like it's the only word that matters. Some of them have lost everything: family, homes, safety, just for saying yes to the man in white who appeared to them one night. And what they need more than anything is for us, their brothers and sisters, to come alongside them. Not to debate them, not to test them, just to love them, to disciple them, to learn from them. Jesus didn't call us to draw lines around our comfort zones. He called us to follow him, and he's already gone far ahead of us into places we were afraid to enter. I'm not the same woman I was before January 14th, 2025. I don't care anymore about looking put together or playing it safe. I died. I stood before the King of Kings. And he told me to tell you, the veil is thin. The harvest is ready. He's moving in ways we never expected, and now it's time for his church to rise, to be bold in prayer, to stop being distracted, to break down the walls we've built in our hearts. There are people right now having dreams of Jesus in the darkest corners of the world. And when they wake up, they are looking for someone, anyone, to help them understand what they just saw. That someone could be you. If you're hearing this and your heart is burning even a little, don't ignore it. Don't wait. Start praying. Start asking God how he wants to use you. Ask him to open your eyes to the ones he's calling. You don't need a platform. You don't need a passport. You just need a heart that's willing. Because Jesus is already doing the miraculous. Now he's just waiting for us to join him. If this story stirred something in your spirit, I want to invite you to do 3 simple things. First, share this video with someone. Let others hear what Jesus is doing around the world. Second, leave a comment below. Whether it's a prayer, a testimony, or a question, we want this to be a place of connection and community. And third, subscribe to this channel for more real stories about how Jesus is still moving today. Because what happened to me, it's happening to thousands. And it might just happen to you.